This episode is brought to you by KJK. Tired of the billable hour? KJK has a solution. The KJK GC Advantage program offers businesses comprehensive legal services in the areas of employment, corporate services, real estate, trademark, intellectual property, and estate planning, all for a set monthly fee. KJK serves as their clients' partners in business, not just their lawyers. Along with cost certainty and predictability, the KJK GC Advantage program gives clients peace of mind, knowing their projects will be handled quickly and efficiently, maximizing the return on investment on their legal spend. So don't go it alone, let KJK help. Learn more by visiting kjk.com. 614 Startups Nation, welcome to another episode of the 614 Startups Podcast. My name is Elio Harmon, your host, and listen, folks, I got a very special guest on the show tonight, an entrepreneur extraordinaire, multiple business owner, Rehgan Avon of AlignAI and Women in Analytics. Rehgan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to finally be on the show. I've been a fan for a long time.
Listen, the feeling is mutual. I am a fan of yours, and it's we're becoming fast friends, I feel like, after a long time of only knowing each other by name and reputation. But for those who might be meeting you for the first time or have heard your name similarly, and they haven't had a chance to talk to you or spend some time with you like I have over the last couple of weeks, who is Rehgan Avon? Where are you from? And how did you come to live in Columbus, Ohio?
Yeah, so I'm from Elyria, Ohio, which is up near the lake. It is west of Cleveland. And I moved to Columbus to go to the Ohio State University, right? To basically major engineering. So thought I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. My dad has he's also an entrepreneur, owned a ton of welding shops, fabrication shops growing up. So I grew up basically around that kind of stuff all the time. And so I thought I would go into mechanical engineering, but really found my passion in industrial systems engineering, computer science, machine learning, data science, all that fun stuff as I went throughout college. And then I just stuck around because Columbus is pretty awesome.
Yeah, so stuck around. Hopefully Columbus continues to be as sticky as we have been. And I think we have all the components to continue to do that. I mean, huge investments from multinational corporations. There are a ton of jobs here. But what I'm most excited about is what's happening in the startup ecosystem, right? And you're a part of that with your company, AlignAI. But I want to go back. I know entrepreneurship is probably in the blood, like you described. Your dad is an entrepreneur. But what led you to become an entrepreneur? And let's chat about some of those early experiences. What was the first business that you started? And then how did you come to be a founder of both Women in Analytics and AlignAI?
Yeah, so I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. My major really pushed kind of the corporate career path a ton. Almost everyone I knew in the major was going to work for a large company like Pepsi or Honda or United Airlines. And actually, what's funny is my co-founder, Brendan, co-founder at AlignAI, Brendan, and I applied to go to Austin for their startup week in 2015, I think, or 14. And basically, it was a fly-in scholarship. So they would pay for your flight down there. They would pay for your kind of admittance to different things. And then they kind of organized the people that got the scholarship. And it was really, really cool. I remember I went to a career fair at the Mohawk, which is like a music venue. And I just was like, this is awesome. Every career fair I've ever been to has been like these weird booths and long lines. And, here we are with like a kind of an open bar and these startup companies and this music venue. I'm like, this is totally my vibe. And so I ended up getting an internship at a startup company in Austin. And after that, I was absolutely hooked. Like, couldn't stop thinking about it. I was definitely, my path was going to be in the tech startup space somehow. And I ended up working for 4 different tech startups in product and data engineering, in the solution space on the business side a little bit around go-to-market. And I've been so addicted. Like, I can't imagine being in any other career. But I kind of stumbled into founding Women in Analytics a little bit. The story around that is absolutely hilarious. Like, I had never been to a meetup before, and I was a college student, and I was trying to find groups of people who were talking about data and analytics in Columbus, and I stumbled upon a big data meetup group. And I literally showed up in a suit. So I didn't know that wasn't what you do. I was, in college and kind of naive about everything. And it was at this Dublin rec center. And I showed up, and I remember the guy running like, "Are you lost? You don't look like you should be here." And I was like, "No, I'm here for the big data meetup, and I looked around, and it was a lot of guys, kind of well into their career talking about data. And I thought it was fascinating. But I noticed quickly that a lot of the communities that were established were pretty much the same in terms of the people that went and who was a part of those communities. And, I was encouraged by a couple of people to start my own community. And so I did in 2016, and then, formally formed a company around that in 2019, which was technically my first company. And it still goes today. We, host one of the biggest conferences in the Midwest, like ours, and the community is a global community at this point. And I am really proud of that entire experience. It was my first, dipping my toes into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And, I feel overdressed for this podcast today, so I get it. I try to dress down sometimes now, but I'm so used to that because I kind of came up in that whole sales culture, and you have to be appropriately dressed for business, and a jacket is appropriate in the evening, even if you don't wear a so that whole routine. So it does take a little bit of an adjustment, but I do understand what you mean by meetups kind of looking the same, at least here in Columbus, Ohio, around tech. But for those entrepreneurs who are just starting out, who might think that they need to have a scalable startup idea at the very beginning, what I'm hearing from you is that this was just a little bit of serendipity, right? You stumbled in, you saw a problem, you decided to solve it without maybe a long-term roadmap to what it is today. So can you help me dispel the myth? Because I think that holds a lot of people back. They feel like the first thing that they start or the first problem they solve has to have a path to an exit.
Yeah. I think it's because those are the stories that are told most often, because those are the most quote unquote interesting ones, the ones that have the big exit and kind of all of the press around it. Those are the ones that get press, So for the most part, at least. And my goal never was to be an entrepreneur. I loved working in startup. I was addicted to that and watching other people do it, but I never thought that I would do it. And so I think that's kind of an interesting path, because there are some people that are like, no, that's what I want to do. I just need to find the perfect idea. They kind of see themselves as an entrepreneur first, and then they're looking for the big idea around it. Whereas I kind of fell into it and realized that I actually really do enjoy the entrepreneurship side of it, not just kind of supporting other entrepreneurs in their, idea or vision. And I feel like that's a very interesting thing. You don't have to have this huge idea up front. And in fact, a lot of the women entrepreneurs I know have started, even if they had started some smaller business in the past, right? You learn a lot of the fundamentals of running a company. And that is so critical to kind of have a learning path that doesn't have a lot of pressure around it. Whereas the other one's kind of like a rocket ship, and you better learn really quickly if you've never done it before. And so I felt like I kind of got a crash course on how to start a company with something that's so much less pressure around it than, these kind of hyper growth, well-funded startups.
Yeah. And I want to jump into AlignAI, but do you think that part of that story is also the need to raise capital? And because you've heard that venture capital is looking for an exit, it kind of predisposes anybody who wants to enter the startup world with this mind map. Like, if you're going to do it, you need to have these large markets and your intention needs to be to exit. Do you feel like that story of both the successes that get publicized plus an underlying feeling like, if I want to do this, I'm going to need venture capital, is contributing to this maybe founder anxiety around the fact that I can't start unless I have a business that's going to be big and maybe a unicorn?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors there. When I first started understanding kind of the venture capital landscape, I understand the statistics behind it now. Like, I get why they, what the returns look like on certain funds and sizes, and what the likelihood is of them getting returns on funds and how they weigh out the probability of that. And so they really are like shooting for the moon for the most part. At least the bigger funds are, because that's how they make their return. And so, but not every company needs venture capital. And like, I think that's the big myth about starting a company. You can have a company and, not raise venture capital if it doesn't make sense to do that. Like, it doesn't make sense to do that for women in analytics. It might make sense to do some like debt financing, if we're going to scale in certain areas, but like raising venture capital, maybe not, right? And it really kind of depends on where you're going and what you're trying to do and what the market size is and what your goals are as an entrepreneur as well. So, it's definitely not needed. And I think there's a very big misconception around that. But it is, once you start going down that route of like, okay, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to go down the venture capital route. It is kind of like you're on the treadmill when you start, right? And you're going, and people have goals around that because that's what they're funding. And so I do think there's a huge misconception, and like, I do think it would be easier for entrepreneurs if they understood in the beginning, like what characteristics about a company would lend itself well to venture capital versus not.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And I think there's room in this ecosystem. And I don't want people to walk. I mean, I guess people see enough of my episodes where they figure like, oh, I only want to talk to people who are going to eventually raise venture capital, right? There's enough room in this ecosystem for all kinds of businesses, which is why I'm more and more interested in kind of that small business landscape and giving some spotlight to those folks who are building companies, because just because you start small today does not necessarily mean that you can't eventually become a big company tomorrow. And venture capital and raising venture capital may not always be the route that you need to pursue. All right, you're already dropping some gems, Rehgan, and we haven't even gotten into AlignAI, but you're building women in analytics. But there's something that happens, right? Where you maybe discover another problem and you want to go into this space and start solving problems there. What was the genesis of AlignAI? What is AlignAI, and what is the problem that you guys are solving?
Yeah. So AlignAI started a couple of years ago. Women in Analytics as a company, as an organization, has been a passion project of mine. So I've always had a full-time job kind of doing this thing on the side because I love building the community. I've met incredible people through the community. I've watched that community provide really incredible opportunities to tons of women in this space. And so it's been a huge passion project of mine. But I also am a practitioner in the space, and that is what I do and what I'm passionate about. And so kind of alluded this a little bit earlier, but I've always kind of been in the machine learning, data science, analytics kind of domains. And, backing up, I've worked at a lot of startups kind of supporting products in that space and technical functions. But there was a specific startup that I worked at with Brendan called Model Up. They're still around. They're an excellent company. And they're a B2B software company that basically was originally selling software into large enterprise organizations, typically in highly regulated industries, and helping them figure out how to deploy and manage machine learning models scale. There's inherently a ton of risk around machine learning. If models are wrong, that could be catastrophic. There's tons of interesting books on this. One specifically is called Weapons of Math Destruction. And it just talks about like when models are wrong, they can be wrong at scale and it can have really drastic impacts. impact on people and companies and organizations. And so basically what that product was trying to do was give an organization a way to take, this code that they had on their laptops, put it into a production system, and monitor performance and risk of models at scale. So if they had 100 models, 150 models, and this is kind of a new thing for a lot of companies. They're doing this for the first time. So Brendan would go into these companies and we would help them with solutions architecture around a lot of this. We'd help them solve tons of technical problems. And the patterns we saw over and over again in terms of their lack of adoption, these new kind of advanced capabilities, was around a lack of process and a lack of kind of general or institutional knowledge on how that company was going to approach that problem. And so, I think at one point we looked at each other like, this is a big problem and we should probably solve this at some point. But this was like years and years ago. And we just both found ourselves in our career kind of aligned at the same time, along with our other co-founder, Ali, a couple of years ago, right when the pandemic started, and decided to build it and build a solution around this particular problem. So AlignAI is basically a way for experts inside of organizations to scale their institutional knowledge quickly. So typically what we think about from that perspective is a lot of educational resources. We think about Coursera and LinkedIn Learning and all of these kind of online, learning platforms. And the problem with those when you're actually using them in practice is that they're really hard to translate into what you're doing in your day-to-day job. So our solution is to kind of change that educational paradigm a little bit, where we have our platform that allows experts inside of the organization to easily create and configure their own curriculum that is specific to the company, and then, disseminate that in a way that aligns with best practices on instructional design and experiential learning and things that make it really easy for people to learn these new concepts quickly.
Okay, wonderful explanation. Again, it's another observed problem, right? You're working on something else. You're solving problems within this startup, like you mentioned, and then you see a problem and say, hey, eventually we're going to come around to solving it. After this break, though, Rehgan, we're going to go deep, right, and truly understand the world that you're speaking about, because maybe we're not all parts of it or parts of our business are. But I really do want to get an understanding of the world that AlignAI lives in, the problem that you're solving, and then why you chose this particular approach versus a different approach. All right, folks, you're listening to the 614 Startups podcast. I'm with my guest, Rehgan Avon of AlignAI and Women in Analytics. We'll be right back. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Nationwide. Nationwide's mission is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. To help fulfill that mission, Nationwide is looking to invest its $350 million venture capital investment fund in insurtechs that will help them create new and exciting products and solutions to meet the needs of their customers. If you're interested in partnering with Nationwide's venture capital team, visit nationwideventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is nationwideventures.com. Nationwide is on your side. This episode is brought to you by Rev1. Rev1's mission is to help entrepreneurs build great companies. As you navigate the waters of business entrepreneurship, you don't have to go it alone. A strategic partnership with Rev1 connects innovators to the talent, customers, space, and funding you need when you need it. Get started with Rev1 Startup Studio by visiting rev1ventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is rev1ventures.com. 614 Startups Nation, welcome back. Thank you for hanging in there with us. I'm with my very special guest, Rehgan Avon of AlignAI. All right, Rehgan, I'm an outsider to your industry, okay? I don't do machine learning and data analytics every day, but I do think you're onto something here by focusing on learning. So let's talk about, please reiterate for me the exact problem that you guys are solving, and then why are you choosing the approach of identifying what folks need to learn and addressing it from an institutional learning perspective?
Yeah. So the problem we're focused on is basically helping organizations mature quickly in the AIs. They usually have like one part of the organization who's much further along in their technical capability or approach or technique in a particular area on building it, designing it, using it. And then the rest of the organization that kind of is catching up to that. We usually call those people the tip of the spear, the ones that are really, leading the charge on innovation in their company around AI. And they're moving so fast, they have a hard time stopping and figuring out how to teach everyone else what they're doing. So typically the organization sees them doing it, sees it working, and they're like, great, we want the rest of the organization to do this too. And so now they're stuck like writing PowerPoint decks and, writing Google Docs or Word docs and setting up meetings with different teams and trying to train these people on what they're doing. And so we just want to make that process much easier. We want to help those people basically take what they know and make it easy for everybody else to learn what they're doing.
Okay, so what is an organization that has this imbalance and this gap between one part of the organization doing this really well and the other part of what is the cost of that if people don't close the gap? What are some of the problems that an organization can run into if that gap persists?
Right now, companies are using AI to compete, right? Like we all know the big tech companies that are like light years ahead from a technical capability. They are light years ahead because of their ability to utilize data meaningfully. And so basically companies are trying to figure out and put a strategy in place around like, how do we use data meaningfully? And like, how do we make sure that we can stay competitive and not lose market share? And so it becomes this big kind of, item for them. Like it's all this discussion around how are we using AI in their board meetings and, what does that look like in terms of our strategic roadmap as a company? And so they're kind of leaning really heavily on their technical organization to basically drive more advancements in utilizing data and AI. And so those teams are not very big. And they're really trying to figure out, our company has never done this thing before. So like, how might we do it here? And what is so unique about our company and our industry and the way that we talk about things and the way that we do things? Like some industries are really highly regulated. So like financial services, they have a lot more regulations and restrictions and compliance that are associated with how they use data. And so looking at some of the techniques that they may use, they may be more restricted or may have more overhead and process on top of that they have to consider. And so it's not a one size fits all. It's not like you can just send everybody this like YouTube video and they automatically get it and you've got this really complex system like at your company tomorrow. And so that process is really slow. For a lot of companies, it can take like 2 years to design something, test it out, prove that it works, and then get the rest of the organization on board. And that's just not fast enough. Basically, companies that are doing that quicker are maturing faster and competing more. And so it's a really big problem. It's what a lot of people call a culture shift, like getting to be more data-driven as a company. And a lot of that hinges in education.
Okay, so it feels very much like a lot of companies where the mandate comes from the market, right? The market is telling you, hey, you need to do this, right? And so everybody internally, the smart companies there at least, they realize, okay, we need to do something here. And it feels like for those companies who can't go out and just hire data scientists in mass, right, to just take their expertise and infuse it into their organizations, they need to make that cultural shift. So there may be some people within the organization that understand the task at hand, but there are also other people who, for lack of a better word, need to be upskilled, right? They need to come along quickly to really understand what it's going to take to execute on this and maybe even compress the time that it takes to get this adoption. And in comes AlignAI. And so describe for me what your process of qualifying a prospect is, because not every company who wants to do this is maybe the perfect Align client. So what's the process of understanding that customer's need and then the onboarding process for Align? How do you go about getting your product into their hands?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question because to your point, the companies that work with us have a strategic initiative around maturing their capabilities in this space. If they don't need us, basically. But the large enterprise organizations struggle when you talk about scale. They struggle with size. So they've got teams across different parts of the organization. They all roll up to different stakeholders. They all have different budgets. And so trying to get it's what a lot of people call like maybe a hub and spoke model internal to their team, where they got this centralized group, then they have all these other groups that are kind of embedded into different functions of the business. But regardless, they have tons of people that they need to basically row the same direction. And so that's perfect for us because we can absolutely help them do that. The other side of the coin is scaling quickly. So basically any company that is getting started where a core component of their product or their company is based off of AI, which a lot of startups are now, they're building some sort of product based on AI. They're trying to scale fast. So they can't, and in terms of scaling, I mean like the number of people at the company, number of people on the team, the data science team, or any of the supporting functions. And so they have to move quickly, and they don't want to over-engineer process because it's going to change really fast. And they have to make sure that people they're onboarding can get on track or like on beat with the organization very quickly. So those are kind of the two extremes of customers that we're targeting and that we have. And then what was the second part of your question?
Getting the product in their hands. So once you qualify them, yes, there's a need, there's a strategic initiative, and you have people that you need to onboard. Once that qualification process is done, how do you bring your product into their company and get full adoption, right? Where everybody is excited, not only the person who sees the problem, but all the people who have to use the product.
Yeah. So basically, we find the person who's struggling the most. And we talk to them and tell them how we're going to make their life better. And we show them the product and what it does and how much faster that process is for them. Because regardless, companies are already trying to do this concept today. They're trying to educate everybody. They're trying to get everybody on the same page. They're just doing it in rather inefficient ways. And they're kind of wasting, capacity of really productive individuals inside of their company and sometimes very expensive people. And so we usually try to find that person. We look for, specific initiatives that they have going on right now, like, hey, we're company X and we're trying to roll out a new system for managing machine learning models in production. And so that's a great time for us to kind of jump in and help them with that curriculum configuration and help them basically plan out, because our tool also helps organizations do learning planning for their entire organization. So bucketing people into personas, understanding where they're at today, where they need to be. We call it objective-based learning. So what kind of skills and jobs to be done do they have to do in the future? And then we train to that. And we basically help that creator get all of that stuff configured, organized, coordinated, and done really quickly. So we usually start with one course or program inside of the tool, and then we can expand to other programs from there.
Okay, so it feels customizable. Is that fair? Okay. But yeah, are they picking off of an a la carte menu, or are you going in and developing some custom programs based on the needs of the customer?
Yeah, so we've generated what we call bases, which is basically a catalog of existing curriculum in this space. So, and we've developed that and tested that over the last couple of years with a lot of our advisory network, expert network that do curriculum advisory work for us, plus also tested in some of our customers as well. So a lot of those bases exist today. So they basically go in, they pick the base that they want to start with, and that base comes with an entire set of curriculum that they can configure. So it comes with all the exercises kind of pre-canned. It comes with different models that they can include or exclude. It allows them to update terminology. And from there, they can kind of customize all of that together themselves and put together what we call a program. which allows them to kind of publish that program and then onboard learners to that program. And then you can kind of track the progress of those learners over time. So they'll build a course, that course lives in a bigger program. That program could be called, self-service is one of our programs that includes like data enablement, data quality, data governance, all of these different courses underneath it. And it basically gets them 70% of the way there. And then they just have the 30% that's unique to their company that they fill in. The alternative to that is just starting from a blank slate, like a Google Doc or a Word doc.
So it feels very much like within a company like that, within your client's company, before encountering AlignAI, they have a couple of options. Well, the primary option that we all have is just run around confused, right? That's the status quo, and cost yourself years, market share, competition pulling away from you. But are there other competitors outside of AlignAI that are either taking a learning approach? I mean, you don't have to name names here, but what are the other options that you're competing against other than the status quo? And we know how sticky the status quo can be, right? Changing, making an investment, and using a product. What are the other options for companies out there that you guys are competing against?
Yeah, there's external kind of tangential products that do things maybe more generically. So like there's a large curriculum development tool, but it's very generic. Like you can build anything in there. You could build leadership training courses in there. And it really just kind of provides you with a toolkit. If I'm an instructional designer, it's like the Canva for me, right, to build classes. And it's super open-ended, but it's a great tool, highly adopted by people in the L&D space. So they don't have the kind of angle that we have in terms of where we're focused and who we're enabling and what we're enabling. And then there's obviously like lots of learn platforms out there today that kind of have these pre-canned skills-based learning objectives, which are still very useful. I wouldn't call that competitive. I would call that like complementary. I actually compare this to building furniture. So like they would be really good at teaching people how to swing hammers and use specific saws for specific reasons. We're teaching people how to build furniture. And so you need to know how to use a hammer. You need to know how to saw, and different types of wood mean different types of things. And if, there's different styles that have been established over the years for people who do woodworking. And it's that we're trying to teach in terms of like process-oriented training, as opposed to like very skill-based training. So we're very complementary from that perspective. And then I'd say the other option is always the internal option, which is them trying to figure out how to conduct training and design training on their own, which sometimes works decent and then other times not so much. So sometimes they have like mentorship programs, right, where you've got who's been doing it, who's more senior, who's been doing it for like 5 years, and then they have sessions regularly with their team and they're trying to teach them how to do it as well. And so, that's pretty iterative, pretty time consuming. We're trying to also address that.
All right. So I love the metaphor of you can use tools. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can build furniture, right? Yeah, you could listen. Yeah, you could talk, but you definitely can't interview like Elio Harmon. Okay. That's the real metaphor here. All right, folks. Thank you for hanging out with us. We're going to go into our second and final break. You've been listening to my conversation with Rehgan Avon of AlignAI. We'll be right back. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Book and Street. Book and Street provides finance and accounting solutions for startups in the Midwest and beyond. From strategic financial support to bookkeeping and everything in between, they've got your back office covered. Let their experienced team of finance and accounting professionals help your startup get it right from the start. Learn more at bookandstreet.com and set up your free 30-minute consultation with their team today. Today's episode is sponsored by the City of Dublin's Division of Economic Development. The City of Dublin provides world-class, tailored business services and resources to ensure the best possible environment for businesses to recruit talent and thrive. Because of this strategic focus and commitment to employer growth, Dublin is the only accredited economic development organization in the state of Ohio. The City of Dublin supports startups and entrepreneurs by offering targeted resources and training programs to grow companies that are financially sustainable, innovative, and committed to creating jobs. Learn how other businesses depend on Dublin. Visit thriveindublinohio.com. 614 Startups Nation, welcome back. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us. I have my very special guest, Rehgan Avon of AlignAI, and we are talking data, all right? I feel like a scientist already, okay? Don't I look smarter? It's only been a couple minutes here with Rehgan, but I feel like I'm better prepared to have these kinds of conversations in my company, right? Around data and where we are in the data space, and then preparing to compete as well. So let's talk about the market, right? So it feels very much like this could be misinterpreted as a fad versus something that's here to stay. So let's talk about the market for data and AI and what that's going to look like in the future.
Yeah, so the software around AI alone has a $62.5 billion market just in 2022. Like just the software, like companies spending money buying software to enable their teams to build AI. And it's growing exponentially. There's actually an incredible report that was recently done by Accenture talking about AI maturity and expectations around growth. The number of jobs in this space is rapidly increasing, didn't slow down whatsoever with the pandemic. In fact, they became way more sought after and competitive. And so it's definitely not going away. And in fact, every single job is kind of turning into a data job. So if you look at, even if you're a CFO, if you're, customer service, whatever function you play, you're touching data somehow. You're either touching a system that's capturing it, that's going to be used by a model or by AI, or you're consuming information that you need to do something with. And so just knowing that transformation is happening across the board is makes me good, because it's becoming essentially for organizations to really make that change and continue to make investment in that area.
Yeah, it'd be, I guess, the equivalent of just every employee having a laptop or a desktop, right? It's gonna be just par for the course, right? It is almost like you can't do your job without it. And that's a great place to be for a business when the folks that you serve cannot do without your solution. But here's an interesting kind of the ethicist in me, the philosopher in me kind of comes out when we talk about things around data and information and how we use those things. I wonder if we could take one step forward in that process. So it's one thing to build these models and get the data. It's another thing for that data to be interpreted into information, and then people having a well-rounded understanding of what that information means. So what are your thoughts on that as a data scientist?
Yeah, I would say it's extraordinarily complex and nuanced and extraordinarily dependent on context. And that makes this whole thing so complicated. So the more information that you have, the more you can model the real world. So that's why they're called models, because you're basically taking fragments of information about something that actually happened, and you're piecing it together, and you're trying to find patterns. And you're trying to use that to predict what might happen in there. So looking at trends of that reality over time. And the more data you have that gives you meaningful descriptions of that, real world scenario, the better. Because it allows you to more accurately model what happened or what might happen. And that's such an interesting concept, because what machine learning is really great at is it's really great at identifying patterns. And right now, sometimes it's really challenging to extract meaning from those patterns because it's very contextual and nuanced. However, the better we can ask questions as people interfacing with AI or a dashboard or data in general, the better we're going to get answers. So the more specific we can be, the more intelligent of a question we get, the better we'll get information back. And so I think where people struggle is thinking about the right questions to ask. And the more we can educate folks around that, like here's the types of questions that would be really good to ask about data, the more we can advance kind of common understanding about those nuances. There's a whole ethical component to this as well, and just in how companies are currently building, models and using them. Building it is one thing, like we can exclude certain parts of the population. That way our model only, is really bad at predicting for them, but great at predicting for other people. Like that's an ethical concern. There's also the usage of it. So just because we know something doesn't mean we should use it for bad. And so just because the model exists doesn't really mean anything. It can tell you some accurate information. It's how we use it that makes the difference. And this is kind of what we call AI system design. So if I build something that's predictive, how do I take the outputs of that and drive action? So you can think of autonomous vehicles. Like there is an algorithm running that has these camera systems where it's trying to detect objects in front of it. So it can avoid that, or detecting a stop sign so it can slow down and stop. And that model is basically saying, hey, there's a stop sign there. You should slow down and stop at this particular point in the distance ahead of the car. Right? That's the action that's been taken off of the intelligence that was derived from that system. And so this is what we call kind of translation or system design, more broadly, like user experience around AI. It's definitely a topic we touch on a lot with companies, because you kind of have to work backwards from like, how would you use that? And then what do you build?
Okay. So what if, and this is just a challenge question, right? As a business owner, let's say you have this massive contract, but what they're building, you observe, might have ethical concerns. Where, not just you, I'm saying take AlignAI out of it. Mm-hmm. Where does the data, I don't call you guys an industry, but where do folks the practitioners stand on clearly building something that as you're building it, you say, hey, the implications here are a little bit questionable. Where is there a body? Is there who is ultimate an arbiter of or the conscience of the data community saying, hey, maybe we should all just step away from this thing and think about it before we move forward?
Yeah, the ethics have come a very, very long way in like the last 10 years. There are pure AI ethicists. I know tons of them now because I also asked this question like 3 or 4 years ago and then started finding people to follow. At our conference last year, the Data Connect conference, we actually hosted an entire panel on this. We had an AI ethicist, an AI lawyer that does litigation against or in defense of companies in a situation where AI has maybe gone awry. And then we also had someone from the FBI who focuses on technology advisory for artificial intelligence. And I'd say we've come a very long way. We're trying to look at more holistically, like what are the regulations you can put in place? And the biggest part is, how can you prove that happened? So like there are some techniques, it's called transparency. So there are some techniques that you can use in AI that are kind of black box. Like you don't really know why it made that decision. So it's kind of hard to trace. It doesn't have a lot of traceability associated with it. So if it makes a not so great decision and then that's actioned on, we want to try to understand why it did that. And so it's actually very interesting because I think the UK just is looking at, if they haven't already done it, they're looking at doing it. But basically, say you're innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. But with AI, they're basically saying you have to kind of prove that you didn't do it. So the onus of proof is on you as the developer, not the developer specifically, the company that owns the AI. And so there's a lot of debates because that means you're kind of exposing your IP a little bit on like, this is how we built it, this is what we did, and you have to go through and explain that. And so it's just a fascinating conversation of how to go about it. Like, should we have federal regulations in place? Should we be fining people? There are some groups that are literally going out and trying to test for ethics associated with algorithms and then like try to shut them down. It's a pretty hot topic right now, but I'm so glad to see that the conversation is happening and people are very serious about it.
Yeah, and which version of the program am I being exposed to as the consumer?
Totally.
It's also the consumer right to know, like, last week you were using version 1 of this thing. We've rolled out version 2 now, and here are the capabilities. Do you want to continue to engage? I think there's room to have that conversation as well, because, machine learning and AI is progressing. And so what is the consumer's right to know as well on these issues? All right, we won't dwell on this. Maybe, I'll come to Women in Analytics, and we could talk a little bit more about it, and I could learn a little bit more about it because I'm extremely curious. All right, so AlignAI. Let's talk about, roadmap over the next 12 months, 24 months. What are some key milestones on that roadmap for you?
Yeah, we have, our team is growing quite a bit. So we're bringing on a bunch of people to our team throughout 2023. So really excited about that. Starting to hit our stride, starting to hit momentum. We spent the last 2 years really digging in deep on the problem space. The particular areas we wanted to start with, which is like, what are companies investing a ton of money in right now? What problems are they trying to solve? And then this whole idea of how we've decided to solve it, really, really testing that a ton with our buyers and target user personas. And we're in such a good place right now where we're ready to start running. So, the team's going to be growing that next year. We're going to see some really interesting advancements in the product next year. And I'm super excited about that.
Okay, awesome. Team, hiring. So just like founders, just like AI is evolving, you're probably evolving as a founder, learning new skills. Hiring is always an interesting kind of point in a founder's life about making those key decisions about who you're going to invite to be a part of your company. And then, kind of the responsibility. Maybe they had a job elsewhere. You're bringing them over to you. And you want to make sure that you're bringing them into a situation where they're going to grow with you. All right. So for folks who've heard your story, they're interested in women in analytics. What's this women in analytics thing? I've been looking for my community. How do they get involved with women in analytics? When is the next conference? And then number 2, you're hiring, right? Somebody's watching this. They want to come work for you, or they hear what you're doing and they're running into the same problem. They want to train up their people. How do they engage with AlignAI on that side?
Yeah, so for Women in Analytics, super easy. You can go to womeninanalytics.com. Lots of ways to get involved. We have tons of free content that you can be a part of, lots of educational series. I just did a webinar today actually on marketing analytics. So you can always tune into those. We have a free membership platform that you can join with tons of other women across the world. We also rolled out a mentorship program, which has been super successful so far. And we have our conference, and the next one is in July, late July. And we have actually some extremely exciting announcements around keynotes. We're really close to making that announcement, but if you're in this space, you're definitely not going to want to miss to this next year's event because of that. Somebody that I've just followed for a really long time and really excited that she's going to be a keynote. So, and you can get all the information at dataconnectconf.com for that. And then for AlignAI, you can go to getalignai.com and find out more information about our learning platform, our adoption platform, and then also some of the trainings that we provide and how we might be able to help your team if this is something that you're about in terms of maturing your organization. And the second part around our team growing, we'll have lots of job postings posted on our company site, company page. So you can always check back there. We also post that on AngelList as well. So just kind of keep up to date with that too.
All right, there you have it. That is my conversation with Rehgan Avon of AlignAI. All right, folks, that's another episode of the 614 Startups podcast. You can find all of our information on 614startups.com. Until next time, peace. That's a wrap, folks. You can find this and all our episodes on our website, 614startups.com. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and all your favorite podcasting platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and write a review. If you'd like updates sent directly to your inbox, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter on the website. To engage in the 614 Startups community, follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 614 Startups on all platforms and join the conversation. For sponsorship opportunities and collaborations, email us at info@614startups.com.